Hey guys, I'm Jessie, and today we are going to be doing a spoiler-free discussion all about The Infernal Devices by Cassandra Claire. So I read this series recently. I actually started the first book, Clockwork Angel, in 2022, and then I read both of these in January because I needed to get through this series. What's funny is I didn't like the Mortal Instruments very much. I don't even think I finished the series, and the first two books were okay, but there was a lot of stuff I didn't like, and I wasn't a fan. So it took me forever to finally pick up the Infernal Devices and read them. And I'm so glad that I did, because this series is leaps and bounds better than the Mortal Instruments. And honestly, I am now excited to get more into the Shadowhunter world and read the rest of her series because I loved these books so much. So I wanted to kind of talk today about the series, about, reading it for the first time. What if you didn't like her other books, her first series? What if, you don't like certain tropes like the love triangle and things like that? Honestly, I still think those people should read it because that is me. I didn't like the Mortal Instruments very much. I typically am not a fan of a love triangle, and I'm in my 30s, so I'm not the target audience for YA fantasy. But you know what? This series was fun, and it was good, and it was well written, and I had a great time. So I wanted to kind of talk about that and let you know why, if you're on the fence, just go ahead and pick up the first book and see what you think. So this series is set in more a Victorian England setting as opposed to the modern day setting of the Mortal Instruments. And honestly, I think I liked that a lot more. We are following Tessa, who is American, and then she comes over to London to basically meet up with her brother because their parents have died, and then she ends up kidnapped and tortured, and she's not sure why, and she ends up being rescued by shadow hunters and kind of living with them at their institute in London, and just kind of learning more about this world, finding out who she is and why these people want her, and what her role is in this shadow hunter world. And it's just really fun and very interesting. I think it's a lot better than the first series. We also follow all of our really fun other shadow hunters, and if you have read the first series, you will recognize a lot of the names, a lot of the last names, because they're the same family names: Carstairs, Herondale, Lightwood, and it's kind of a lot of references to the first series, even though timeline-wise, this takes place way before that. So it's kind of a fun kind of a callback, and you're like, oh yeah, so this is kind of where their history was, if that makes sense. So we have Will and we have Jim, who is James Carstairs and Will Herondale, and they are parabatai shadow hunters, and they are kind of our two main love interests. They are our two love triangle men, and typically in a love triangle, we have the one that we really like and we know she's going to end up with, and the one that we're why are they even there? We know she's not going to end up with that one. That's not how this love triangle was, because you could go back and forth, and honestly, I liked both of them. I might lean a little bit more towards Jim, but I like a tragic backstory. And honestly, I loved them both. I loved them as parabatai and best friends. I loved them both as love interests for different reasons. And I thought that either one that she chose would be fantastic. And the ending of the series, I think, really wrapped it up well. And it kind of gave fan service what it wanted, and made me cry and made me happy, and it was bittersweet, and we all kind of come full circle in it and get what we want. It was really cool seeing the connections to the first series, even though I didn't love it. I also didn't hate it. I just didn't love it. We get, references to certain immortal characters that were in the first series that are in this series. So we get like Mangus Bane, who is probably my favorite part of the first series. He's in this series, and because he's an immortal warlock. And a lot of things that are like said or insinuated, kind of, you're like, but I know what happens in the future with you, sir. So that's kind of fun to be like, you say that now. The interesting thing is, I know because of the other books that take place in modern day, this is what happens. And it's really fascinating, and we get to see kind of the advancement of the Shadowhunter technology, like portals and things like that we have in book 1 of the, the Mortal Instruments. We have these things. We don't have them now, and we get to see kind of how that becomes a thing. Again, it was really fun. So while I didn't love the first series, I do think that it is one that you should read if you like care about the connections, because there are some important connections. And honestly, not having remembered, or maybe I didn't finish the last book, is kind of making me want to go back and reread it, because there were things that happened in the last book of this series that really tie in heavily to the last book of the other series. So just kind of keep that in mind. They were written in tandem. So the last 3 books of Mortal Instruments and then these books were kind of written in tandem, like a year apart. So the connections are really strong there. So I really liked the first book. The second book, Clockwork Prince, was my probably least favorite of the series, but it had my favorite scene of the series. And I still really loved it, and I think I gave it 4 stars. So while it was my least favorite, like, take that with a grain of salt, because I also have my favorite scene, and I still gave it 4 stars. The final book in the series, which is Clockwork Princess, I gave 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was a really good conclusion. And the epilogue is what I think made it even that much better. I enjoyed the epilogue. So I highly recommend getting to this book and seeing the conclusion of it, because I think things went really well, and it was actually ended really well. There were a few things in the series as a whole that I didn't love. I thought that the villain motivation, again, was a little lacking, and kind of the final battle in the last book almost seemed too easy to me. Like, certain things that happened, they just felt like there was all this buildup for not as much payoff, but I still really enjoyed it. Again, while I don't think the villain was like as villainous and had as great a motivations, he was still interesting in what he was doing. And while I didn't think that the main battle, the end, was like the greatest, it was still satisfying. And there were a lot of satisfying moments in this last one. There were a couple moments that had me going like fist pumping, and I was enjoying it. There was one in particular moment, which is kind of funny, that had me like, yeah! But we'll get into that when we talk a couple spoilers. I thought the characters were really well done. Honestly, Tessa is not my favorite like female protagonist. She is kind of that typical bland, almost like self-insert-y kind of female protagonist. But I didn't hate her, but there were some things that annoyed me about her, but I still thought she was good. But Will and Jim, I thought, were extremely well written. I thought that they were, really excellent kind of opposites to each other, but they worked together well as parabatai and best friends. And their relationship was pretty tragic. Jim has a very tragic backstory, and then there's some chaos around Will that kind of makes his, like bad boy, like doesn't care persona make a little bit more sense. But I thought that they were really well done, and I liked seeing kind of everybody else, the head of the Institute and her husband, and the fact that we get, a female head of the Institute, and that's a thing that like wasn't a thing back then. There's a lot of like gender biases in this book that are kind of pushed against, and I like that. So overall, I say this is a really great series, even if you didn't like the Mortal Instruments. So definitely give it a try. And if you do enjoy it and you do make it to the end of Clockwork Princess, I recommend going and reading the short story After the Bridge. It is free online, I believe on Cassandra Claire's like old Tumblr, and she put it out for the world to read for free, so it's not stealing or piracy. She put it out there for everyone to read. It's very short, but it's very good, and it happens after the epilogue of Clockwork Princess. And honestly, it just increased my enjoyment of the series as a whole. I thought that it was something that I wanted to see ever since book 2, and I finally got to see it, and yeah, I enjoyed it. So definitely go and read it. And if you haven't read the last books of Mortal Instruments, kind of like me, you can wiki it, which is what I ended up doing, but yeah, it has a lot of connections to those. So I would recommend like a little refresher on the last 3 books of the Mortal Instruments, even if you hated them. Now I want to talk just a little spoilery, because it's really hard to put my thoughts into words without spoiling some of it, because some of the things that like I loved and didn't love were spoilery. And I just wanted to talk about them. The main like spoilery thing that I just kind of want to talk about is the love triangle. Because I know that a lot of us aren't fans. We're not fans of love triangles in most books because they're so predictable. They're always the same. There's the one that you know that they'll end up with and the one that you're like, there's no way they'll end up with them. And this book was not like that. Will and Jem were both awesome options, and it was such a bittersweet, tragic thing that happened between all of them. But I love the conclusion of this love triangle because she ended up with both of them. And I thought that was just genius because, Tess is a mortal, we find out. She is part warlock and part shadow hunter. And while Jem is addicted to this like drug that's going to kill him, but also keeping him alive due to no fault of his own, and he ends up becoming a silent brother, which that was the big thing that while I was reading it, I was like, wait, I remember Brother Zachariah. He's Brother Zachariah? So that was just really cool. And then, so she ends up with Will at the end of this book, and you're not sad about it because they're great together. And then obviously he lives out his lifespan and dies. She is immortal. Jem is a silent brother, so obviously she can't be with him. But in the other books, he becomes Shadowhunter again. Like he becomes himself again. He's cured basically through the heavenly lights or something to do with Jace. I don't fully remember that. Like I said, I don't think I read that book. But they end up back together after he becomes mortal again, which I absolutely loved seeing. And that short story, After the Bridge, happens after they meet back up at this bridge that they would meet on once a year to talk to each other while he was still a silent brother. And my favorite scene in book 2, which is like one of my favorite scenes ever, is the first time that her and Jim kiss in his room and things start getting slightly hot and heavy. Obviously, this is not a smutty book. I will say that. So there is no explicit hot and heavy in any of these books. There's Fade to Black and there's, making out and stuff. But I loved that scene in his room where she's like, I'm kissing Jim. I'm kissing Jim. Do I love Jim? And like, they're about to do things. And then she knocks over his yenfin, and it obviously ruins the moment. So nothing ever happens. And then they have another scene in book 3 where they almost do the stuff, but then they're interrupted and they don't do the stuff. So in this book, finally, I mean, hundreds of years later, they finally do the stuff. And that is in the After the Bridge story. And it is smutty in that one. So remember that. Like, if you've gone in and read it, it's not Fade to Black, really, in that After the Bridge story. Because it wasn't actually published. It was just something that she wrote on, like, her Tumblr. But we finally get to see Jem and Tessa, like, hook up. And I really loved that. And I'm excited to read the rest of the books in this Shadowhunters world. I'm actually about to start, is it the Dark Artifices? The one that's next, I think it starts with Lady of Midnight. That is what I am starting now. And I'm really excited. And I'll give you all my thoughts on it. Because we're going to see if, like, this series was an outlier in my enjoyment. Or if it was just the start of my enjoyment because I didn't love Mortal Instruments. Well, that was fun. So if you're anything like me and you didn't like Mortal Instruments very much, I still say give this series a try. It was fun. It was a good time. It was my kind of, like, CW drama and my kind of love triangle, and the satisfaction and glory is just so good. So I say give it a chance. Pick up the first book. And if you like it, just keep on, because the end is worth it. The culmination of this series is worth it. And read the short story after, because that makes it even better. All right. Thank you guys for hanging out with me. My name is Jessie, and I will talk to you next time. Bye.